The silence was the first thing that struck him. It was a structural flaw in the architecture of his life, a load-bearing wall that had been removed without warning. Ethan's house, a small two-bedroom bungalow he had been slowly renovating with his own hands, had never been truly silent. There was always the low hum of Clara's television shows, the tinny sound of music from her phone, or the cadence of her voice, a melody he had mistaken for the foundation of his world. Now the quiet was an active presence, a dense, suffocating medium that filled every room. He stood in the doorway, his work boots leaving dusty footprints on the welcome mat he had just replaced. The air still held the faint floral ghost of her perfume, a scent he now realized was a harbinger of decay, like flowers left too long in a vase. He walked through the living room, his gaze tracing the lines of the life they had shared. The throw pillows she had insisted on were perfectly fluffed. The magazines on the coffee table were fanned out just so. It was a room staged for a photograph, not a life. His eyes landed on the kitchen counter, a slab of polished granite he had spent 2 weekends installing, his knuckles raw and his back aching. Upon its sterile, reflective surface sat 2 objects, placed with a cruel and deliberate precision. The first was a cream-colored envelope, his name written on it in Clara's looping, immaculate script. The second was her wedding ring, a simple gold band accompanied by the modest diamond he had saved for a year to buy. It sat there like a piece of evidence at a crime scene, glinting under the recessed lighting he had so carefully wired. He did not need to open the note. The story was already told in the empty space where her car should have been in the driveway, in the hollowed-out sections of their shared closet, in the deafening silence that pressed in on him from all sides. He picked up the ring. It was cold, a perfect, unbroken circle of betrayal. It felt impossibly heavy in his palm, the concentrated weight of a future that had just been demolished. He had spent his life building things, retaining walls, frameworks, additions. He understood stress points, shear walls, the slow, insidious work of rot. He had never imagined the entire structure of his marriage could fail so catastrophically without a single visible crack beforehand. The note was short, its words as neat and merciless as the placement of the ring. She was sorry, but not truly. She had met someone. Julian? A name that felt foreign and slick. Julian could give her the life she deserved, the note explained, without the constant smell of sawdust and grease on his clothes, without the endless waiting for someday. It was a clinical amputation, devoid of the messy emotions of their shared history. It was a business decision, and then came the final blow. A postscript that felt less like an afterthought and more like a strategically placed, explosive charge. Lily's school called. She's been suspended again. I can't deal with her right now. You're better at this stuff anyway. Lily, Clara's younger sister, a 17-year-old girl who had been dumped on their doorstep 6 months prior after their mother had passed away, a whirlwind of black eyeliner, ripped jeans, and a simmering rage at the world that had left her an orphan. Clara had seen her as a burden, a social inconvenience. Ethan had seen a kid drowning, and he had tried, in his quiet, clumsy way, to be a life raft. Now the raft was all she had left. Clara had not just deserted him. She had left him with a secondary, monumental responsibility, a teenager whose own world had already been shattered twice over. He sank onto one of the kitchen stools, the granite cold against his forearms, the note crinkling in his fist. The silence of the house was no longer empty. It was filled with the sound of a wrecking ball swinging through the center of his life. If stories about resilience, the price of loyalty, and the kind of love that survives the wreckage speak to you, Stay with me. The first few weeks were a blur of numb autopilot. Ethan moved through his days like a ghost, haunting the construction site of his own life. At work, the familiar heft of a hammer felt foreign in his hands. The roar of the circular saw a distant hum. He was a foreman for Thorne Construction, a mid-sized company run by a gruff, no-nonsense man named Marcus Thorne. Ethan had always taken pride in his work, in the clean lines of a framed wall and the perfect pour of a concrete foundation. Now his mind drifted. He missed details. He misread a measurement on a set of blueprints, an error that cost the company a half-day of labor to correct. Marcus had pulled him aside, his weathered face a mask of stern disappointment. "Your head's not here, Ethan. Get it here or go home." There was no malice in it, just the hard-edged reality of their profession. A distracted man on a job site was a liability. He went home, but home was no longer a refuge. It was a chaotic, hostile zone, a physical manifestation of his internal state. Dishes piled up in the sink, a testament to meals he barely tasted. Dust motes danced in the afternoon light, settling on surfaces Clara had always kept pristine. The house felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for a life that was no longer there. His primary focus, the one anchor in the storm, became Lily. She was a spectre in her own right, drifting from her bedroom to the kitchen and back again, her headphones a permanent fixture, a shield against a world she did not want to engage with. Her anger, once a fiery explosion, had cooled into a sullen, icy resentment. She saw him as part of the wreckage, another piece of debris from the life that had been taken from her. "Did you eat?" he would ask, his voice sounding rough and unfamiliar in the quiet kitchen. A shrug, a mumble, sometimes just a shake of her head as she stared into the glowing screen of her phone, scrolling through images of other people's perfect lives. He would make dinner, often simple, functional things like pasta or grilled cheese, and leave a plate for her on the counter. Sometimes it was gone in the morning. Sometimes it was still there, cold and accusing. He was operating on fumes, physically and emotionally exhausted. He would fall into bed, the empty space beside him a vast, cold expanse, and sleep would offer no respite. He dreamed of collapsing structures, of foundations turning to sand, of reaching for a hand that was no longer there. He would wake up with his heart pounding, the smell of her phantom perfume in his nostrils, more tired than when he went to sleep. The breaking point, when it came, was not a grand explosion, but a small, mundane failure. It was a Tuesday evening, the sky outside a bruised purple. He had just gotten home after a grueling 14-hour day, a rush job to pour a foundation before a predicted week of rain. His muscles ached with a deep, thrumming fatigue. His hands were raw, caked with concrete dust that had worked its way into every line and crease. He found a note on the counter, not from Clara this time, but from Lily's high school, delivered by a truant officer. It was a formal notice of expulsion, vandalism, fighting, a long list of infractions that painted a picture of a girl screaming for help in the only language she knew. He stood there, the official paper trembling in his hand, and felt a profound, crushing sense of failure. He was failing at work. He was failing as a husband, though that title was now obsolete. And he was failing this kid, this angry, broken girl who had been left in his care. He went to the fridge to get a glass of milk, his mind a maelstrom of anxiety and despair. His hand, clumsy with exhaustion, slipped. The carton tumbled from his grasp, hitting the linoleum floor with a sickening thud and bursting open. A river of white flowed across the tiles he had laid with Clara, pooling around the legs of the table, seeping into the grout lines. It was just spilled milk, a stupid, insignificant accident. But in that moment, it was everything. It was every mistake, every failure, every piece of his life that had shattered and spilled onto the floor. He did not move. He just stared at the spreading white mess. A sound escaped his throat, a raw, guttural noise that was part sob, part scream. It was the sound of a structure giving way under too much pressure, the shriek of tortured metal, the groan of splintering wood. His knees buckled. He sank to the floor amidst the mess, the cold milk seeping through the knees of his work pants. He buried his face in his rough, dirty hands and wept. He wept for his lost wife, for his failed marriage, for the boy who had believed in permanence. He wept for the angry girl in the other room who was just as lost as he was. He wept until there was nothing left but a hollow, aching emptiness. He had hit rock bottom, the bedrock of his despair. The cold of the milk-soaked floor seeped into his bones, a chilling baptism into his new reality. He stayed there for a long time, the architect of a ruined life, sitting in the rubble. From the doorway of the hall, a shadow shifted. Lily stood there, her arms crossed, her face a pale oval in the dim light. Her usual mask of bored indifference was gone, replaced by something else: shock, fear, maybe even a flicker of empathy. She did not say a word. She just watched him, this man who was supposed to be the adult, the stable one, completely and utterly broken on the kitchen floor. Her presence was the catalyst. He looked up, his vision blurry with tears, and saw not just a rebellious teenager, but a reflection of his own desolation. They were two survivors of the same shipwreck, clinging to separate pieces of wreckage. In that moment, a decision formed, not in his mind, but in the deepest marrow of his being. He would stop sinking, he would start building. He pushed himself up, his limbs stiff and heavy. "I'll clean this up," he said, his voice a raw whisper. He looked at Lily, truly looked at her for the first time in weeks, seeing past the anger to the terrified child beneath. "We're going to be okay," he said, the words feeling like foreign objects in his mouth. He was not sure if he was trying to convince her or himself. She just stared at him for a beat longer, then turned and disappeared back into her room. The door clicked shut, a sound that was no longer one of separation, but of a fragile, unspoken truce. The next morning, Ethan made the first concrete, sacrificial step toward rebuilding. In the garage, under a dusty tarp, sat his one true treasure, a 1969 Ford Mustang Mach-1. It had been his father's, a half-finished project left to him after his dad passed. Over the years, Ethan had poured countless hours and what little spare money he had into it, restoring the engine, rebuilding the transmission, sanding and priming the body. It was more than a car, it was a connection to his past, a symbol of his own patient craftsmanship. It was also the only thing of significant value he owned outright. He spent an hour cleaning it, his hands moving with a familiar practiced grace. He polished the chrome until it gleamed, vacuumed the interior, and wiped down the dashboard. Then he placed an ad online. Within a day, a buyer came, a man in his 50s with an appreciative eye and a genuine love for classic cars. He circled the Mustang, running a reverent hand over its powerful lines. "She's beautiful," the man said. "You've done incredible work." Ethan just nodded, a lump forming in his throat. They negotiated a price, fair and swift. He signed the title over, his hand steady, and watched as the man drove his history, his one indulgence, down the street and out of his life. The sound of its rumbling engine faded, leaving an aching void in the garage. But in his pocket he had a cashier's check that represented stability. It was money to pay the bills, to hire a tutor for Lily, to fix the gaping holes in their life. It was the first block of a new foundation. His decision to fight back extended to his professional life. He walked into Marcus Thorne's makeshift office on the job site the following Monday. Marcus looked up from a set of blueprints, his expression wary. "If you're here to quit, just leave the keys on the desk," he grunted. "I'm not here to quit," Ethan said, his voice firm. "I'm here to apologize. My head hasn't been in the game. That's on me. It won't happen again." He paused, taking a breath. "I also saw a problem with the HVAC layout for the third floor of the Sterling project. The architectural plans call for a main trunk line that runs right through a planned load-bearing support. It's a mistake, a big one." Marcus frowned, pulling out the thick roll of blueprints for the office building they were contracted to build. He spread them across the rickety table, his finger tracing the lines Ethan had indicated. For a long moment, there was only the sound of rustling paper. Marcus swore under his breath. "Son of a bitch, you're right." He looked at Ethan, his gaze sharp and reassessing. "The architects at Rossi and Finch are supposed to be the best. How did you catch this?" "I look at the plans," Ethan said simply. "All of them, not just the structural. I want to see how the whole building fits together." That was the day his relationship with Marcus Thorne began to change. It was also the day he first heard the name Rossi. The architectural firm sent one of their own to the site to address the error. He expected some slick, suit-wearing designer. Instead, a woman in her late 20s appeared, wearing practical boots, a hard hat that looked like it had actually seen use, and a focused, intelligent expression. Her name was Isabella Rossi. She was the Rossi of Rossi and Finch, having inherited her father's stake in the prestigious firm. She walked right up to him, her hand outstretched. "You're Ethan? I'm Isabella Rossi. You saved us from a multi-million-dollar catastrophe. Thank you." Her handshake was firm, her gaze direct. There was no condescension, no hint of an architect looking down on a foreman. There was only a shared language of competence. She unrolled her own set of plans, and for the next hour they stood over the hood of his truck, talking about ductwork, shear stress, and building codes. She listened to his suggestions, her pen making quick, precise notes. She saw not just a laborer, but a man who understood the soul of a building, the way its bones and its breath had to work in harmony. It was a conversation between two builders, one who used steel and concrete, and one who used ink and paper. When she left, she handed him her card. "If you ever see anything else, you call me directly, day or night." That small piece of cardstock felt different from the cashier's check in his pocket. It wasn't money, it was respect. It was the first new brick laid right beside the first block. The next 5 years were a testament to the slow, relentless power of the grind. Time did not heal the wound Clara had left. It scarred over, a thick, tough layer of tissue built from exhaustion and resolve. Ethan's life found a new, demanding rhythm, a cadence set by the dual beats of professional ambition and parental responsibility. The years passed in a montage of long days and even longer nights. The sun would rise over the steel skeletons of new buildings, finding Ethan already on site, a thermos of black coffee in one hand and a clipboard in the other. The sun would set on his small bungalow, the windows glowing with a warm, solitary light, illuminating his silhouette, hunched over textbooks and drafting tables. He had taken Isabella Rossi's respect as a challenge. He enrolled in night classes at the local community college, starting with basic drafting and moving on to structural engineering and architectural history. The calluses on his hands from manual labor slowly softened, replaced by the ink stains of a student. The smell of sawdust and welding fumes that clung to his clothes gave way to the crisp, clean scent of paper and the faint, ozonic hum of a plotter. He was trading his physical tools for strategic ones, his hammer for a T-square, his power saw for building information modeling software. His relationship with Lily transformed with the same glacial slowness. The money from the Mustang sale had gone toward a good therapist and a private tutor. The sullen, angry girl began to find her footing. Ethan attended every parent-teacher conference, every school play, every awkward awards ceremony. He was a constant, steady presence in her life, a foundation that, unlike every other one she had known, refused to crack. He taught her how to change a tire, how to read a blueprint, how to frame a wall. He did not try to replace her father or her mother. He simply became Ethan, the man who was always there. The angry silences between them gradually filled with conversation, first about school, then about her friends, and eventually about her future. One evening, as he was struggling with a particularly complex engineering problem for a class, she sat down beside him. "The load distribution is wrong," she said, pointing a finger at his diagram. "You're not accounting for the lateral shear from wind." He stared at her, then at the textbook, and realized she was right. A slow smile spread across his face. The girl who used to spray paint walls was now seeing the invisible forces that held them up. Professionally, his ascent was methodical. His eye for detail and his deep, intuitive understanding of construction earned him more responsibility at Thorne. Marcus promoted him from foreman to project manager, trusting him with bigger and more complex jobs. Ethan became the bridge between the architect's vision and the hard reality of the job site. He was the translator, speaking the language of both the designers in their climate-controlled offices and the ironworkers walking beams 300 feet in the air. He and Isabella, now Izzy to a select few, developed a close working relationship. Their late-night calls were no longer just about emergencies. They became long conversations about design philosophy, about the elegance of a well-placed cantilever, about the way a building should feel to the people who used it. Their relationship evolved with the same deliberate care they put into their projects. It was a slow-burn romance built on a foundation of mutual respect and shared struggle. It started with coffee brought to the site on cold mornings. It grew during late nights in her office, surrounded by models and blueprints, arguing over the placement of a window to catch the morning light. The line between professional and personal blurred so gradually that neither of them noticed the exact moment it happened. One night, after a grueling week, he found himself telling her about Clara, about the note, about the spilled milk on the kitchen floor. He laid out the raw, broken pieces of his past on the drafting table between them. She did not offer pity or platitudes. She simply listened, her dark eyes filled with a profound understanding. When he was finished, she reached across the table and placed her hand over his. Her touch was not one of passion, but of solidarity. "You didn't just rebuild," she said, her voice soft. "You built something better from the ground up." Marcus Thorne, seeing the synergy between them and recognizing Ethan's relentless drive, made him an offer. "You're wasting your talent working for me," the older man had said, his gruffness barely concealing his pride. "Let's become partners. I've got the capital and the reputation. You've got the vision and the work ethic. Rossi's firm will be our first client." They formed Thorne and Cole Development, a boutique firm that quickly gained a reputation for smart, efficient, and beautifully integrated design and construction. Ethan Cole, the man with grease under his fingernails, was now a partner in a burgeoning development empire. He wore tailored suits that fit the powerful frame he had built through years of labor. His hair was starting to show threads of silver at the temples, a testament to the years of stress and study. His hands were clean, but they still knew the feel of steel and stone. He had become harder, more disciplined, a man forged in the crucible of betrayal and rebuilt with the tempered steel of his own will. The ghost of his past appeared on a crisp autumn afternoon, 7 years after she had vanished. A headline on a financial news website caught his eye as he reviewed quarterly projections in his new corner office, a space enclosed by glass walls overlooking the city he was now helping to shape. Croft Holdings collapses amidst fraud allegations. Julian Croft, the slick, wealthy man who had been Clara's ticket to a better life, had built his empire on a foundation of lies. It had crumbled just as spectacularly as Ethan had always suspected it would. He felt a strange lack of satisfaction, a quiet, clinical detachment. It was simply the logical conclusion of a flawed design. A month later, his assistant buzzed him on the intercom. "Mr. Cole, there's a woman here to see you, a Clara Cole. She doesn't have an appointment." The name struck him with the force of a physical blow, a phantom limb aching with a memory of pain. He had not heard it spoken aloud in years. He had legally reverted to his birth name, but she, it seemed, was still clinging to his. "Send her in," he said, his voice betraying none of the sudden turbulence in his chest. She walked in, and the 7 years fell away. She was thinner, her face etched with fine lines of anxiety that her carefully applied makeup could not quite conceal. The expensive designer clothes she wore seemed to hang on her, a costume for a role she no longer knew how to play. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a brittle, desperate performance of remorse. She looked around his office, at the sweeping views, the custom-built mahogany desk, the architectural awards displayed on a floating shelf. Her eyes, which had once looked at him with disdain, now held a hungry, calculating gleam. "Ethan," she breathed, her voice a carefully rehearsed whisper of awe and regret. "I can't believe it. All of this. You did all of this." She took a step closer, her hands clasped in front of her as if in supplication. "I made a terrible mistake. I know that now. Julian, he was a monster. He ruined me. I have nothing." Her performance was flawless, the glistening tears in her eyes, the slight tremble in her lip. It was a masterclass in emotional manipulation designed to elicit pity and guilt. She was playing the victim, casting herself as another casualty of Julian Croft's downfall, conveniently omitting the fact that she had been a willing passenger on his fraudulent ride. "I'm sorry to hear that," Ethan said, his tone cool and neutral. He remained seated behind his desk, the broad expanse of mahogany a physical and emotional barrier between them. He felt nothing of the old sting. He was looking at a stranger, a ghost, from a life that no longer belonged to him. He was a different man now, a man who understood that the most dangerous weaknesses in a structure are the ones you cannot see. He had spent years reinforcing his own foundations, and she would find no cracks to exploit. Her face faltered for a fraction of a second, the mask of remorse slipping to reveal the raw desperation beneath. Pity was not working. She shifted her strategy. "I was so stupid, Ethan. I threw away the only good thing in my life. You. Us." She gestured vaguely around the opulent office. "We could have had all of this together." It was a clumsy, transparent plea, an attempt to reinsert herself into the life he had built, not just without her, but because of her absence. He thought of Izzy, of the late nights and shared dreams, of the quiet, unshakable partnership they had forged. He thought of Lily, now a confident young woman studying architecture at university, her tuition paid for by the company he had built. "There is no us, Clara," he said, his voice flat and final. "There hasn't been for a very long time." The rejection, so calm and absolute, ignited the fuse of her anger. The performance of the penitent victim evaporated. replaced by the familiar, venomous entitlement he remembered all too well. "You can't just throw me away," she hissed, her voice rising. "I am still your wife. We were never legally divorced. I have a claim to all of this." Her hand swept out again, not in awe this time, but in a gesture of ownership. It was her trump card, the leverage she believed would bring him to his knees, a legal technicality she had preserved as a fail-safe. She was attempting to blackmail him to lay claim to a share of the empire he had bled for, an empire built on the ashes of the life she had torched. Ethan leaned back in his chair, a strange sense of calm settling over him. He had anticipated this. A good builder always prepares for the worst-case scenario, for earthquakes, for floods, for the return of ghosts. For years, he had quietly paid a lawyer to keep tabs on her, to document her life with Croft, to prepare for this very moment. He had not done it out of lingering attachment, but as a matter of structural integrity. He had to protect what he had built. He looked at her, at the desperate, grasping woman she had become, and he felt not anger, but a profound and weary sadness. She still saw him as the naive, trusting man she had left behind, the man with dirt under his fingernails and a heart too easily broken. She had no idea who he had become. She had no idea that while she was living in a gilded cage, he had been learning the art of the long game, a discipline of patience and strategy that far surpassed her petty schemes. He had built skyscrapers from the ground up. Her attempt at blackmail was a child's sandcastle against a rising tide. The final confrontation did not happen in his office. He had his assistant show Clara out, her threats and vitriol echoing in the hallway before the heavy oak doors closed, sealing her out of his world once more. A week later, the official-looking envelope arrived, as he knew it would. A letter from her lawyer outlining her legal claim as his spouse to half of his assets, including his stake in Thorn and Coal Development. It was a formal declaration of war. Izzy read the letter over his shoulder, her expression hardening. "She's trying to burn it all down," she said, her voice tight with anger. "She can try," Ethan replied, his voice calm. He picked up the phone, not to call his lawyer, but to make a reservation at a quiet, neutral bar downtown, a place with dark wood and low lighting, suitable for final negotiations. He sent a simple text to Clara. "My office, 7 p.m. Friday. Come alone." He then made one more call. The invitation arrived a few days after that, thick, ostentatious cardstock, embossed with silver lettering. Clara was getting married again. The groom's name was Gregory Finch, a junior vice president at a massive real estate corporation, Omnicorp. The invitation was not an olive branch. It was a power move, a final, desperate flex. It was a message. "I don't need your money. I've already found my next Julian, but I'm still coming for what's mine." The wedding was in 2 weeks. His legal battle was just beginning. It was a two-front war she was waging. Ethan stared at the invitation, a slow, cold anger building inside him. Not the hot, messy rage of his past, but a focused, calculated fury. Izzy saw it in his eyes. She placed her hand on his arm. "Don't go," she said softly. "Don't give her the satisfaction." "Oh, we're going," Ethan said, a grim smile touching his lips for the first time. "But we're not going for her." He looked at Izzy, at his partner in every sense of the word. "She thinks this is her victory lap. She thinks she can wound me by flaunting her new mark. She has mistaken kindness for weakness for the last time. It's time to show her the building is complete and the foundation is unshakable." He picked up the invitation. "She wants a showdown. She just doesn't realize it's going to be on my terms." The wedding was a monument to superficiality. Held in a glass-walled ballroom atop one of the city's newest and most fashionable hotels, it was all white flowers, shimmering crystal, and breathless pronouncements of eternal love. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and quiet desperation. Ethan and Izzy arrived not with a sense of dread, but with a quiet, unified purpose. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit, the kind of garment that speaks of power without shouting. Its sharp lines were a far cry from the grease-stained work clothes he had once lived in. Izzy was breathtaking in a simple, elegant emerald green dress that highlighted her quiet confidence. They were not guests, they were observers, emissaries from a world of substance visiting a world of surfaces. They saw Clara across the room, a vision in white lace, her arm linked with her new husband, Gregory. He was handsome in a generic, corporate way, his smile too wide, his eyes darting around the room, assessing the net worth of his guests. When Clara saw Ethan, a triumphant, malicious smirk flickered across her face. She and Gregory made their way toward them, gliding through the crowd like sharks sensing blood in the water.
"Ethan, I'm so surprised you came," Clara said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "And you brought a date." She gave Izzy a dismissive, once-over glance, cataloguing her dress, her jewelry, her worth. "This is my husband, Gregory Finch." "A pleasure," Gregory said, extending a hand to Ethan, his handshake firm but his eyes cold. He looked from Ethan to Izzy, a smug, proprietary look on his face. "Clara's told me so much about you. Tough break with the old life. Glad to see you've, landed on your feet." The condescension was thick enough to cut with a knife. He believed he was the victor, the man who had won the prize. "It's good to see you looking happy, Clara," Ethan said, his voice even and calm. He met her gaze directly, and for a moment, the entire noisy ballroom seemed to fade away. He was no longer the broken man she had left. He was the architect of his own destiny, and she was just a ghost, a faded photograph from a demolished past.
At that moment, a new figure approached their small group. He was an older man in his late 60s, with a mane of silver hair and an aura of quiet, indisputable authority. He moved with the unhurried confidence of a man who owned every room he entered. The low chatter in their vicinity died down as people recognized him. Gregory's boss, a senior vice president standing nearby, seemed to shrink in on himself. Gregory himself went rigid, his plastic smile freezing on his face. The man walked directly to Ethan, ignoring everyone else. He clapped a familiar hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Ethan, good to see you. Glad you could make it." His eyes, sharp and intelligent, turned to Izzy. "Isabella, you look stunning as always." Clara stared, her mouth slightly agape. Gregory's face had gone from smug to confused to utterly pale in the space of 5 seconds. He looked at the powerful man, then at Ethan, then back again, his mind struggling to process the impossible scene unfolding before him. Ethan smiled, a cool, polite expression that did not reach his eyes. He made the introduction, his voice carrying with quiet authority in the sudden pocket of silence. "Clara Gregory," he said, "I don't believe you've been properly introduced. This is my associate and a dear friend of the family." He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. "Alistair Finch." The name landed like a physical blow. Alistair Finch, not just a Finch, but the Finch, the patriarch of the family, the founder and chairman of Omnicorp. Gregory's ultimate boss, a titan of the industry, so far removed from his own junior executive level that he was more of a legend than a man. And Ethan, the man he thought of as his wife's pathetic blue-collar ex, had just called him an associate. Clara's face crumpled. The colour drained from it, leaving behind a sickly, greyish pallor. The triumphant smirk was gone, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. This was the secret weapon. This was the hidden knowledge. It wasn't about a legal countersuit or documented evidence of her own misdeeds. It was about power. She had tried to climb a ladder only to discover that the man she had discarded owned the entire building. She had showed up to a gunfight with a knife, only to find he had brought an army. The realization dawned on her with devastating clarity. Ethan wasn't just with the boss. He was, in a world that mattered, on the same level. He didn't need to fight her in court. He had already won in the arena of life, a victory so total and absolute it rendered her pathetic attempts at blackmail completely irrelevant. "Alistair is Gregory's uncle, I believe," Ethan continued, his tone conversational, as if discussing the weather. "He was kind enough to join us tonight. Family is so important after all." The situational irony was a blade twisting in the wound. Alistair Finch, a man who valued loyalty and integrity above all else, looked from his nephew's new grasping wife to Ethan, the man he had personally chosen to partner with on a massive downtown redevelopment project, a deal worth more than Gregory would see in 10 lifetimes. Alistair's expression was unreadable, but a flicker of profound disappointment crossed his features as he looked at his nephew. The game was over. Checkmate. Ethan gave a slight nod. "If you'll excuse us," he said, taking Izzy's arm, "we should let you get back to your guests." He and Izzy turned and walked away, leaving Clara and Gregory standing frozen in the middle of the ballroom, the architects of their own spectacular social implosion. They did not look back. There was nothing left to see. The drive away from the wedding was silent. The city lights smeared past the windows, a river of gold and white against the deep blue of the evening. The sound of the engine was a low, steady hum, a stark contrast to the cacophony of the party they had just left behind. Ethan kept his eyes on the road, his hand steady on the steering wheel. He did not feel the hot flush of victory he might have expected. There was no triumphant surge of adrenaline, no desire to gloat or celebrate her defeat. Instead, a profound sense of lightness bloomed in his chest, an emotional buoyancy he had not felt in 7 years. It was the feeling of a massive, crushing weight being lifted, not just from his shoulders, but from his very soul. The ghost that had haunted him, the spectre of his past failure and betrayal, had not just been confronted, it had been peacefully, finally exorcised. It had evaporated into the inconsequential thing it had always been, rendered powerless by the sheer, solid weight of the life he had built. Izzy reached over and placed her hand on his, her touch warm and grounding. She did not speak, but she did not need to. She understood. She had been there through the long years of reconstruction, had helped him draw the new blueprints, had been his partner in laying every new foundation. She understood that this was not a victory over Clara, but a victory over his own past. It was the final, definitive act of closing a door and turning the key. He intertwined his fingers with hers, a silent acknowledgement of their shared journey, and the solid ground they now stood upon together. He drove not to his house, but to a familiar address in a quiet, tree-lined university district. He pulled up to the curb outside a brightly lit coffee shop. Through the window he could see Lily, now a poised and confident 24-year-old, laughing with a group of friends, a sketchbook open on the table in front of her. Her face was bright with intelligence and joy. Seeing her, whole and happy, was a more potent symbol of his success than any skyscraper or bank account. She was the project he was most proud of, the broken structure he had helped mend and reinforce until it was stronger than it had ever been before. He sent her a quick text. "We're outside." A moment later, she gathered her things, hugged her friends goodbye, and came out to the car, her face breaking into a wide smile when she saw them. "How was the weird, obligatory wedding?" she asked, sliding into the back seat, the question laced with the gentle, knowing sarcasm that was so uniquely hers. "It was quiet," Ethan said, and it was the truest thing he could say. Instead of heading home, he drove downtown into the heart of the city he had helped reshape. He parked in the private garage beneath the spire, the signature building of Thorne and Cole Development, a gleaming 60-story tower of glass and steel that had been his and Izzy's first monumental project together. It was their shared vision brought to life, a testament to their partnership. He led them to a private elevator, the ride smooth and silent as they ascended into the sky. The doors opened onto the rooftop observation deck, a space not yet open to the public. The three of them stepped out into the cool night air. The city spread out before them, a breathtaking tapestry of light and shadow, a sprawling, living entity. From this vantage point, they could see the other buildings they had worked on, markers of their shared history. The Sterling Project, where he had first caught Izzy's eye, the community centre he had designed pro bono, the residential complex where Lily had done her first internship. It was a map of their lives, written in concrete and steel across the skyline. He had started as a man who built walls for other people. Now he stood atop a world he had built for his family. He stood between Izzy and Lily, his two pillars, the true load-bearing structures of his life. The wind whipped at their hair, carrying the distant sounds of the city, a symphony of life and energy. He looked at Izzy, at the love and strength reflected in her eyes, a love built not on superficial promises but on shared blueprints and the hard work of creation. He looked at Lily, the girl he had inherited in the wreckage, who had become a daughter to him in every way that mattered. This was his empire. It was not the buildings, the money, or the power. It was this small, unshakable family unit, forged in crisis and solidified by love and loyalty. The final piece of the design was in place. The structure was complete, sound, and built to last. He put an arm around each of them, pulling them close. The cold satisfaction of strategic victory had faded, replaced by a deep and abiding peace. The past was a closed book, a case study in flawed designs and foundational failure. The future was here, spread out before him, glittering with infinite possibility. Izzy leaned her head on his shoulder. What a night! He looked out at the endless expanse of lights, at the world he had helped build from the rubble of his old one. The ache of the past was finally completely gone, replaced by the quiet hum of a well-built life. "Let's go home," Ethan said,